Australians, somebody who was, it could be a former child migrant, somebody that came out from overseas, predominantly a British subject where the parents over there thought, the kids can get a better start in Australia, and they were put into institutional care. So there's that group. There's also the group that were, for no reason their own, they were probably taken away from their parents and put into institutional care because of neglect. It may well have been because the family couldn't look after them properly.
We are the older adults who as children were in institutions which were all closed by 1989. We're 500,000. We consist of 50,000 stolen generation, around 120,000 English migrants, 300 Maltese migrants, and the large majority are the non-Indigenous forgotten Australians, around 4,500,000 like myself.
So it's a hell of a group, and there's 500,000, nationally, plus, and that's a guesstimate. I would suggest there'd be a lot more kids than that.
The reasons that they were, not raised by their families were really varied and could be anything from, the death of the parents right through to being raised by a single mother or cultural issues or mental illness. A really wide variety of reasons were given for taking these children from their families. The research tells us that very few of them don't experience ongoing negative consequences of their time in care. Certainly the Royal Commission into abuse in institutions it uncovered a huge amount of neglect, abuse, all kinds of abuse, and just living conditions that were not conducive to.
And I just want to chuck into that as well. People were adopted out, fostered and adopted out, and went to adopted families and got abused.
It concerns me because I was institutionalised as a young kid, and I worked in aged care as a nurse, and I've always had a passion for, community type work, because there's a lot of people concerned about going back into aged care, which is an institution.
He's into the bikes
so
like me, that guy.
At the majority of our clients that we work with
keep his mind off that horrible stuff.
Between the ages of 50 and 80 years, although we do work with some who are younger and some who are older as well. So for forgotten Australians, a lot of them are quite fearful about re-entering an institution like an aged care facility because of the experiences that they had as children and the trauma and abuse that they experienced in institutional care. So for them, before they re-enter in care, a lot of the clients have actually requested that they would prefer to stay in their homes and receive support from aged care services in their homes. It's a safe place for them. They have their personal belongings around them. They may have a pet or a garden that they look after, and friends and family are able to come and visit. So definitely forgotten Australians expressed to us that they would prefer to stay in their homes as long as possible before re-entering an aged care facility.
Well, a lot of my friends are all from the reform schools and orphanage like myself, and we're all getting up around the 65 and later year old, and they will not go to aged care. They'd rather commit suicide than go into a nursing home. Fear of abuse again.
One of the strongest themes that has come out of our research has been this really profound aversion to what forgotten Australians call re-institutionalisation. So that is, I came from an institution and I experienced terrible things in this institution, and now you're asking me to go back into another one.
Frailty for forgotten Australians. I'm seeing that they're frightened about growing old. I've had some of my friends that have actually committed suicide too scared to grow old. To me, that is part of frailty. What can we do to help them? How can we address that? But the thing is, it's not getting recognised in the areas that we need it to be, especially in the healthcare sectors, and the government really needing to acknowledge the fact that these things have happened. They've acknowledged it, but they're not acknowledging the repercussions repercussions of all that from childhood. Yeah, of the impact of ageing is having on a lot of forgotten Australians. I've been working on this with different organisations such as AFA, Alliance for Forgotten Australians, which I was elected on their board, and then my time was finished. But I'm still working on it. I now have the privilege of working with Plug-in and COTA, and also Helping Hand on the needs of forgotten Australians and how those organisations can incorporate their needs to help them. And to me, that's really important.
If you want to be specific about aged care, you know, the Helping Hands scenario, the situation here, and other states have got they're working on different type of, you know, scenarios. We're going to make it our role to bring all those together, because at a national level, it's no good, you know, it's no good having, you know, one state doing this, another state doing that. That's old hat, you know. We need to coordinate it and to make sure that it all works, and we have one program, one plan, you know, across the board. And hopefully this can be, you know, that can be the real good catalyst that will start things, you know, the ball rolling. I'm one of the lucky ones, but yeah, there's a lot that have, you know, just over nothing. So they need to be looked after.
Unfortunately, a lot of the forgotten Australians have health conditions and premature health conditions compared to a non-forgotten Australian. So unfortunately, that means that a lot of the forgotten Australians have had to request and access medical support, and a lot of them may need to enter aged care facilities at a younger age than a non-forgotten Australian.
Years-wise, I'm not that old. I should be in the prime of my life, not at that, you know, horrible stage where I've aged, you know, having a body of a 70-year-old. Although some 70-year-olds are that fit, it's amazing. It really is, isn't it? But unfortunately, I'm not. So frailty's a terrible thing. It's a frightening thing.
I know that forgotten Australians, our health is affected many years before the general population. So I think that we're probably more frail.
It's important to keep in mind that this is a lifespan issue. Even if a person left care at 18 years old, the effects of that care, the effects of those adverse experiences, they don't end when that person leaves care. They really continue, and we see it now right up into older age. And that is why aged care providers need to understand the context and the lifetime that comes before that this person brings with them to aged care.
One of the key points we would like to emphasise during the training for aged care workers is what is trauma and what is childhood trauma, and how the impact of childhood trauma can present throughout someone's life, and also that trauma can present differently for each person, and for the aged care workers to understand how the trauma might present and why, maybe their actions, something they've said or something they've done, or a smell that they've had, or something, how that has evoked that memory for the forgotten Australian, and to understand how the trauma may present for them in their later life, and to realise that comes from the childhood trauma that they experienced in an institution. So I think definitely training the workers on what is trauma and how trauma may present differently for each person is really important.
People aren't being looked after, and, you know, the case plans, the carer plans and all that sort of thing, you know, the case workers, they haven't got a clue, and they don't really understand it, you know, and that's where people fall through the cracks. And before you know it, you've got people, you know, we're going to get back to square one.
Historically, the aged care system tends to neglect the psychological and emotional needs of the people that they care for. There's a real, we prioritise medical and physical needs for good reasons, but by prioritising that so much, we miss out on, we have less time to really think about people's psychological needs and the supports that they need to be emotionally well. And trauma-informed care, I think, has a huge place in aged care environments to help everybody in that environment recognise when there are emotional needs, when there are trauma-related needs that might be affecting that person's behaviour and care, and know what to do, know who to talk to about that, and where to refer to.
Well said.
You know, how to ask and how to support that person.
Well said.
The Forgotten Australians group has been recognised as a special needs group within legislation, but it's actually getting that implemented and seeing that actually operate, that aged care services can be available for Forgotten Australians at a younger age.
To me, it shouldn't matter what your nationality is. If you're of need, why are you not putting that group anyway? It's like, you know, they talk about racism, they talk about exclusion. Well, they're excluding people like myself from actually getting better.
Well said.
Because I am not, you know, I'm not a stolen general. I'm not 65.
Well said, love. I agree with this lady.
But I am a Forgotten Australian.
100%.